Pacific environment was a huge reinforcement for the kinds of work that we were doing to, in a sense, promote and I guess celebrate values, that were really quite strongly Pacific related. And we had the opportunity in 1980 to go to the South Pacific Festival of the Arts, and just before that time I started to develop my first really kind of more sophisticated kind of instrument building style of instrument, I suppose. It was multi-voice percussion, but it included PVC pipes, and that PVC pipe concept derived really from a bamboo source, which was Melanesian, but there was no way I wanted to use the bamboo because it was too directly kind of referencing the indigenous. But what we were doing with it was very different. But I just wanted to, I found PVC pipes, and they were a sort of obvious thing within our society because they're used as commonly as drain pipes for houses. So it was a nice thin-walled pipe, and I just found that the pipe itself gave this beautiful electronic tone. It's a bit like bass guitars. So it was very different to what was happening in parts of Melanesia where bamboo was being used, but there was definitely a connection. It made a connection, that was kind of tangential, but there as a reference and as a tribute, in a sense, an homage, to Pacific sources. Particularly with the group From Scratch, I was really lucky to be able to travel. We had some great trips, and the 1980 South Pacific Arts Festival was one, and that was held in Papua New Guinea in Port Moresby, and there were like 50 performing groups that came out of the kind of the mountains and hills and valleys and coastal areas of Papua New Guinea, many of whom had never been, I don't think, had probably ever been to Moresby before, or been out of their villages before, perhaps. So it was wild. It was amazing.
Wow.
It was just such a, I was right in my element. I just loved that context. It was just so exciting.
Yeah.
And people just, bringing, they didn't have words for, there wasn't a term to describe art, but they lived this cultural life that, where ritual and that was just embodied in it, and they danced it and they sang it, and their costuming just kind of represented, gave an expression, a visual expression to their culture, amazing stuff. So, I had a strong interest in all that and in Maori culture, from my own New Zealand context. And I've always had that interest. But, the other thing was coming to the west coast of the States, meeting, I think I probably first met Lou Harrison when he came to New Zealand on a Fulbright. And he saw the From Scratch group. I think he was invited to one of the events in New Zealand, it was a Pan-Pacific Exchange kind of event. It was contemporary music, I think in 1984 or something like that. I just forget the actual date. But he came with Bill, and he saw the From Scratch group, and we struck up a friendship. He was enamoured with what we were doing. I think, he thought it was pretty cool, which was wonderful. So I got a lovely sort of sense of reinforcement from him. And then subsequently, when I came to the States in the early 90s on a Fulbright, I spent some time with Bill and Lou at their house, talking about the instruments that Lou had designed, Bill had built. So the influence that Lou had on this coast, and people like obviously Parch and many others, Ivor Darrick, there are so many really, Chavez, others who have kind of informed the character of music performance and contemporary expression on this coast, but also have absorbed the Pacific influence, and the Pacific kind of reinforcement, in the same way that we have, in the South Pacific.
Right. Exactly.
So, this is all the currents really, really crossing, and it's so, that's so inspiring. Yeah, I think it does come down to spirit, actually, and maybe a background philosophy, that informs the way people do things. So rather than the actual expression, the expressions are very different, and that's what I love the diversity. I mean, it's so different.
Right.
The expression of traditional kind of indigenous cultural expression in Aotearoa, my country, is very different to even, like Samoa or Niue or Melanesia, incredibly different, Right. We didn't, for example, in New Zealand, we didn't really have a percussion culture at all. But, you go just a bit north and the pate, or the slit drum culture went right across from Southeast Asia right through, to Tahiti. So it's, the expressions are quite varied and different. And I mean, I'm, of course, quite attracted to Indonesian because of the polyrhythmic complexity and the hokkading, but I mean, those were terms and interests that evolved through something that was quite, for me, it was quite intuitive in a sense. I didn't really, it wasn't something I was adapting from observations of another culture. It was something that grew out of a context in this sense.
Right.
It was scratch orchestra.
Yeah.
It's a celebration of aspects of the natural order. Either it's turning points in the seasons or whatever. I mean, it can be growing cycles, whatever. I mean, all these things suggest potential for celebration and for actually reverence, if you like, of natural phenomena. And it can be anything from, great mountains and trees and living things, to turning points, like solstices and equinoxes and so forth. So, that was for me and again, it was kind of something instinctive in a sense, but it was an awareness of a history of too,
Yeah.
And so some of my first performative events were really kind of involved with creating rituals that were celebrations, like we did a solstice celebration every winter, from dawn to dusk.
Yeah.
Did that for about 25 years.
Wow.
But in a natural parabola, which was a volcano, in the middle of Auckland. It's amazing, because Auckland lives on, we're on an isthmus with 50 volcanoes.
Yeah.
And some of those are just beautiful spaces.
Yeah.
And this particular one called Mongafau, which is the mountain of the Fau tree, or commonly known as Mount Eden, it has it's just a natural parabola. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
When you get at the bottom of it, and just at the scoria base, you can't hear anything but the nature around you. It just blocks out the city. It's amazing. What I call songstones.
Songstones.
This was just a found object that I was involved in a film project at the time, actually, in the West Coast and South Island, and just exploring the old. I used to have a passion for artifacts, picking, go fossicking and things like that from the indigenous culture, and just to understand and kind of, like the reverence for stone alone, was great. The shaping and beautiful objects that Maori, created from stone, just fabulous,
Right.
both as weapons and tools.
Sure.
And so, I was lucky enough as a kid to find a few of these things, which just encouraged my quest, I suppose. But I was on the lookout for stuff, so I was fossicking around the West Coast River and just kind of picking up stones and things. And in the river, there were these beautiful little flats of schist. They'd just been worn. They'd come down.
What is schist?
Schist is it's like a sedimentary rock, I think.
Oh, okay.
But it's kind of flecked with mica.
Oh, yeah.
So it's, when you see it in the water, it just sparkles. You think it's like gold, or
Yeah.
something, And you're picking up these little stones, and they're just beautifully rounded flats. And I found that, I could put one in the cup of my hand and tap it with another, and I could change the pitch.
Yeah.
And that just got me going on picking up the stuff, But then you had to find the right shaped stones and things that create different effects. But, every stone, whether it's, depending on its geological source, produces different kinds of sounds, when you really get into the subtlety of stone sound.
Right, the physical.
There's a big renaissance in New Zealand at the moment. in Aotearoa with the kind of the traditional Māori instruments. It's called taonga puoro, and that's the treasures of the treasures of the kind of the place and so forth. And it's all these instruments have come, they're basically using natural materials.
Yeah.
And there's quite a few Pākehā like me who are kind of, who are using some of those things. You have to be careful, how you use them, and if you are using them in that kind of traditional way, you have to be always acknowledging, the source and the culture. I think this is so interesting because, we talked about in the past, appropriation became, a big PC kind of thing, be careful about what you're appropriating, all sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And still, you have to be,
Sure.
I think, particularly when you're taking stuff out of ritual context. But I think, as long as you have respect and it's used in a way that takes it into another slightly different domain,
Yeah.
That's the history of music.
Right.
Everywhere from around the world, people have borrowed and changed and kind of modulated, and that's informed and enriched.
Right.